Hey everyone, I just started a YouTube channel. I wanted to give back to everyone who's having to miss church at Five Points in Tharptown and anyone else who wants to hear my lessons. We are in difficult times right now when it comes to coronavirus. Our way of life's having to change. And I want to start putting my sermons on here. And again, by no means does this mean that we should be substituting this for our church service. I highly, highly, highly recommend that once all this is over, go to your church services, be a part of the church, participate, sing, pray, do all the things that we're commanded to do. But this is a temporary band aid for a temporary problem. And also, it gives me a chance to repurpose my sermons here on the internet for people who may not get to come. Whether you're sick, maybe there's something going on in your life that keeps you from being there. And it gives you a chance to look back at the sermon and look at the verses to make sure what we're saying is from God. If you have any questions or comments, you can always email me or message me in the comments below, and I'll try to get back to you the best that I can. Um, but I do think this is a good idea right now, and I'm sorry for my camera being sort of grainy and weird. This is the camera that's on my laptop. I'm going to try to do something better in the future, maybe. We'll see what happens. Also, my glasses are picking up the screen. I'm sorry about that. Try to move around as I can. But I hope this encourages you to come to church. We welcome you anytime when we have services. You may hear something running in the background. I will give you a forewarning. My hamsters like to be active when I'm in here studying or working on something. You may hear something rolling in the background. I do apologize for that. But I think what we're going to start doing is put my sermons on here, and maybe on Tuesdays or Thursdays. Maybe. We'll see what happens. See how I can keep this up. I'll be going over the books that we're going over in the different classes that I have. I would like to do Harkreyer's book in First Timothy, and I wouldn't mind looking at the book they're doing over at Tharptown. Maybe discussion, looking at it. I think these are really good books. I think they're really good ways for us to get together and reach out, and especially in times where we're supposed to be quarantined. So, I don't want anyone to get this coronavirus. I've heard different things about it. I don't know what's true. I don't know what's false. I've heard things that's worse for the elderly people and those with pre-existing conditions, and that's kind of scary when you think about stuff like that. Also, if you do survive the coronavirus, I heard it causes lung damage, and we don't want that. We don't. But we do want to be smart, and right now the smart thing to do is, social distancing and stuff like that. I know 5 Points is going to continue to have somewhat of a service first thing in the morning, and I know Tharptown's doing theirs first thing in the morning, but all their services are cut until indefinitely until we are clear. So within our minds, again, my name is Matthew McDuffa. I've been preaching for a while. People seem to be enjoying what I do, whatever that is, but I just love doing what God wants us to do, and that's study His Word, and that's what we're here to do. Please keep profanity, negative thoughts, off this. If you don't believe in God, that's your opinion, but there's no point in being hateful. Hateful comments will be deleted, and probably result in blocking if continued. But let's talk about doubts and fears, because exactly that's what's going on right now is people's doubts and fears. And I'm really impressed with how God sends encouragement messages to His people to fear not. Now again, I'm going to go over some verses. You can pause the video and look them up, or you can follow along if you're quick enough with me. But in Genesis chapter 15 and verse 1, it says, "After these things the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Abraham, I am your shield, your exceedingly great rewards.'" In Genesis chapter 26 and verse 24, it says, "And the Lord appeared to him the same night and said, I am the God of your father Abraham. Do not fear, for I am with you. I will bless you and multiply your descendants for my servant Abraham's sake." In Isaiah chapter 41 and verse 10 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And Matthew chapter 10, verse 31 says, do not fear, therefore. You are more value than many sparrows. In 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 14, but even if you should suffer for righteous sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. So again, God tells us not to fear. And it's clear that God does not want us to be afraid and wants us to live a life that is healthy. Not of fear, not of what might happen in the circumstance that surrounds us. You know, there's a movie called Forrest Gump, and a line that we all know real well. And in that movie, Tom Hanks, who plays Forrest Gump, was sitting on a bench. He's sharing chocolates with another person. In this philosophical moment, he's like, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And no matter who they are or what age you are, you know that that's true. That life can change in an instant. Life can change very, very quickly. And it's not all sweet. It's not always good. But your life can change from a moment to the next. And that change can throw your life upside down, or it can be one of the best things ever. Like the decision to be a Christian. It's probably one of the best decisions you've ever made, if you've made that decision. Maybe you haven't. And that's a good thing to do, is to think about how much better would my life be if I served God. I want to share something with you. It's something I found online from a book. And I want you to think about this just a little bit. It says, in the years leading up to the Second World War, the British government was worried that if the event of a war, the German Air Force launched a major offense against London. And the British military command believed that there was nothing they could do to stop it. As a result, the government would be worried that the people in London would panic and stop working, fleeing to surrounding countryside, and that all individual industrial productions would be grinded to a halt, and they would lose the war due to such. And they contemplated building a massive network of underground shelters and set up several mental hospitals outside the city to handle a flood of mental cases once the bombing started. And actually, the Germans held that same theory, because if you can break morale, if you can break people's concentrations, then you've won, you know? But they had that same theory, and they believed that if they bombed London, it would destroy that morale of the British people. So the bombings did arrive, and it was horrific. 1 million buildings were destroyed. Yet, that widespread panic never happened. The mental hospitals they built were never used, and they repurposed them for other uses. And the bombing produced 3 kinds of people. The first were, unfortunately, the dead, and they were near misses who were traumatized by the event. And then there were remote misses who came out of the experience with a sense of triumph, a sense of pure happiness. You know, they say that we're all prone to being afraid of being afraid. And conquering that fear produced in the people of London exhilaration. In the midst of that blitz, a middle-aged laborer in a button factory was asked if he wanted to be evacuated to the countryside. He was bombed out of his house twice. And each time, he and his wife were fine. But he refused. He refused to leave. And he said something funny like this: what? And miss all this? Not for all the gold in China. There's never been anything like it. Never, and never will be again. Now, whether he's crazy, that's for you really to decide yourself. But he wasn't going to let fear conquer him. When you look at David and his encounter with Goliath, he was a young man who had many near misses. Many things happened to him. If you want to go ahead and turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 35, I want to read that real quick, because if ever there should be a line in a movie this is one that's always like put a smile on my face, a smirk, like, yes, this is the guy. This is David. In 1 Samuel 17 and verse 35 says, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it rose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defiled the armies of the living God. That's a powerful statement. As a result, that David was not traumatized, but rather he was very confident. And that's something that we need to realize. They have that same book talking about London and Germany. It said that courage is not something that you already have that makes you brave. But when tough times come, courage is what you earn when you've been through tough times. And that's what we have right now. Tough times. We need that bravery right now so that we can have that courage afterwards. Because here's the thing. Storms and trials in our life come. Sometimes they're big. Sometimes they're small. Sometimes they're in the middle. Maybe it's a hurtful remark you heard. Maybe you lost your job. Maybe you got sick. Maybe you lost someone you love. Maybe it's financial. So forth. It is going to happen. Storms happen. But we can get through this. Life is really just a season. I think the Bible refers to it as smoke. It's gone. When you look at life compared to eternity, it is but a moment. And we can get through this. We can get through this virus. We can get through everything and anything. Because we have the most valuable player on our side, don't we? Because the challenge in life is when we face these near misses, these storms, these trials. And it doesn't make us more apprehensive and more fearful. Think about the Great Depression. There were some people who took their lives, and there were some people who didn't, who made it. And you can't help but wonder how some of these people thought every time wars happened, or stock market happened, or something happened that changed our economy. Were they afraid? Were they afraid of losing everything again? But something inside them said, this is going to get better. And it did. And we need to tell ourselves that too. To steal a line from the Batman movie, it's always darkness before the light. Darkness before the light. But we can't let fear rule us. It's easy to let something in our past happen that dictates our future and keeps us apprehensive in the future. We'll get through this. And we'll get better. There'll be laughter again. We'll get to eat at other restaurants again. See our favorite movies again. Lord willing. But I want to ask you something. When you think about storms and trials in our lives, think about a campfire. What happens when you light a campfire? You're sitting by nice warm logs, fire rising, little embers go up, right? Do you ever think what happens to those embers? Have they ever crossed your mind? Sometimes little embers go up, and as they fall down, dissipate into nothing, right? Do you ever stop and wonder, do you ever fear that maybe one of these little embers could start a fire? Maybe like the one in Australia. Maybe like the ones in California. But we don't think about that, do we? Because we don't let that fear rule in our hearts. And I'm not saying those fires are not important by any means. What I'm saying is, we kept going on with our lives, didn't we? We helped. There was a problem, and we helped. Everyone did, but came together. But if some of those embers was to fall down and touch dry grass, unpredictable results happen, don't they? But it's impossible to watch every single ember that goes up and see what happens to it. If we live our life like that, trying to find every what if, every scenario, we're going to drive ourselves crazy. How do we handle these near misses, though? Because their storms are alive. And individuals who come out of these trials, they have that courage, they have that confidence. But unfortunately, there are some who are fearful, broken, and forever wounded. But I will say this, the good news is that we make that final decision, whether to be fearful or confident, whether to exit that trial stronger or weaker, strengthened or shattered. We make that decision. Going back to the fire, while we can't watch every single ember that goes out and falls down, we can be smart and look around to make sure nothing's happening. The good news is you make that decision to be smart or to be fearful. In James chapter 1 and verse 4 it says, "But let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing." The Bible wants us to be perfect and complete. The Bible wants us to have a happy life, a fulfilled life, a good life. God wants that for us. And He knows what's best for us. There's sometimes we may question, we may like, but what do you mean? He's still in control. No matter how bad things get here, God's in control. In Hebrews chapter 10, verse 35 says, "Therefore do not cast away your confidence, which has great reward." And I find that last verse very interesting, because so often we talk about people losing their confidence, as if confidence can just disappear or walk off on its own or just honestly leave. Yet this verse is kind of encouraging when you think about it, because our confidence cannot leave without us saying, "You can go." It doesn't leave without our consent and without our permission. And we really need to remember that when you face any trial, do not fear losing your confidence. Rather concentrate on what you're going to gain out of this. And I know that's hard sometimes. What do you mean, what can we gain through trials? Well, here's the thing. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 3 it says, "And not only that, but we also glory in tribulation, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance character, and character hope. Now hope does not disappoint, but the love of God has been poured out in our hearts by the Holy Spirit, who has given to us." We know that God's given us these attributes. When we look at tribulation and we see what it produces out of us, it makes us stronger, it makes us better, it makes us pure. But it can also break us if you let it. And we can't let it, not now, not ever. I've seen too many people be close to obtaining that goal, reaching that goal, and give up. They were so close. But this is not anything new, though, because this even happened during Jesus' time. We knew it happened during his time as well, because we know him and his disciples found themselves in the middle of a ferocious storm. And this one's actually a physical storm. I've been talking about, you know, not real storms, but trials that happen in our lives. And this was a trial for the disciples. A ferocious storm happened in the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus and his friends were in the middle of it when a storm hit. It was terrifying. It looked as though they would not survive the storm. And what happens next is, for us, the readers and disciples, they were not prepared for this. So let's talk about that story. But before we get into the story, I want to mention something and point out something from this lesson of Jesus in the storm. The first things you know, and we've talked about just a little bit ago, that storms will come. Remember that. We're not going to be having the perfect life here on this earth. Storms will happen. And it reminds me of 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 12. It says, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trials which are about to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you." So, should we be shocked? The answer is no. We should not be shocked that this is happening. But there's many who don't seem to understand this. The disciples were shocked when they were in position of the storm in the Sea of Galilee. After all, was Jesus not with them? Would God not protect his Messiah? Would he not protect his followers? How could this happen to them? How could they be in this situation? And I've met people who had the same mentality. People who say things like, "Did I not do all the right things? Isn't God supposed to look out for his own? Doesn't God protect who he loves? How can this be happening to me?" God made a great promise to Abraham, but in order to receive it, Abraham had to go through some long sufferings. And this is life. And you never know what you're going to get. But even with promises of God, endurance and faith are the keys. And these things are only possible because of the promises and foundations that God has set forth for us and for those in the past. In Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 19 says, "This hope we have as an anchor of the soul, both sure and steadfast, which enters the presence behind the veil." There may be some of us who are watching this thinking that there's storms in my life that are raging. Again, it might be financial, it might be health, maybe a lot of things. Maybe it's this virus, maybe it's you lost your job, maybe it's a relationship, maybe you've tried to be a good person, do the right thing, and yet you feel like you're sinking like this boat in Jesus' story. And maybe you think the same thing as the disciples. "Jesus, don't you care if I drown? Are you aware of what I'm going through?" Well, what's interesting is that when Matthew and Luke tell their story of the Gospels, they got to leave that question out, whether Jesus cared about their problems or their perilous situations. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 25, then his disciples came to him and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we are perishing." In Luke chapter 8, verse 24, and they came to him and awoke him, saying, "Master, Master, we are perishing." I'm sure these words, as well as many other words, were mentioned. They shouted and they feared. Some Bible scholars say that Matthew and Luke's thoughts about the words were extremely inappropriate. How could you say that to Jesus? But they did. And that was their true feelings. They were in a storm, and they were frightened. But they couldn't understand how or why this was happening. And here, in a storm in our life, I'm going to tell you what it doesn't mean. Number one, it means that God doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. God does love you. He loves everyone. It does not mean that God's angry with you or he's paying you back for something. God's not toying with you. And sometimes the storms in our life are self-made. Maybe we spent too much. Maybe we did something we weren't supposed to. And what I mean by that is, we know drugs are bad, and yet people still take drugs. And then wonder how they get in the situations they get in. Right? Sometimes we can't help it. Maybe the storms wasn't our fault. Like losing a loved one in a car wreck from a drunk driver. But instead of analyzing it and assigning blame, it becomes a very fruitless activity. We look to God and we trust what He has planned for us. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 45, it says that you may be sons of your Father in heaven, for He makes His sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends the rain on the just and the unjust. In other words, good things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, bad things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. There's nothing we can do about it. But we can make it through it. I want to share another story, and I did a lesson a while back on this subject, and I found the story so interesting that I really wanted to put it in this lesson as well. Sorry, one of my hamsters. A TV's news crew was on assignment in southern Florida, filming the widespread destruction of Hurricane Andrew. The camera panned around the area amid the devastation and debris. One lone house was standing on its foundation. The owner was cleaning up his yard, and the reporter approached him saying, "Sir, why is your house the only one still standing? How did you manage to escape the severe damage of the hurricane?" And he said, "I built this house myself. I also built it according to the Florida State Building Code. When the code called for the 2x6 roof trestles, I used 2x6 roof trestles. I was told that a house built according to this code would withstand a hurricane. I did, and it did. Could be that no one else around here followed that code." This man knew storms were coming. He was warned, just as the Bible warns us. It had nothing to do with him. It was all about the area that he lived and the nature of these storms. He knew they would come. So his job was to be prepared. When the sun was shining, the skies were blue, it may seem foolish to put in these extra steps. But he did. The extra expense and the trouble to make sure this building was up to code. But he did. And when the time came, his was the only house left. It was his wisdom. Wisdom from the code. We have wisdom too, from the Lord. Do we not? He teaches us how to live, how to react, to always trust in Him. But when the storm came, that man's house remained. And when storms come in our lives, we stand fast. We stand strong, like a pillar of truth. But the second thing to take from that story of Jesus in the Sea of Galilee was that Jesus was with them in the storm. And I have to ask you, if you had one person in your corner, who would you want it to be? I think we'd all say Jesus, right? He's the one we'd want in our corner. We want him in our boat. Because the problem with the disciple was he was with them. But he was asleep. And it was due to two things. Number one, he was very tired from teaching. So he was inside the boat in the bottom part and taking a nap. And I mean, obviously Jesus knows who he is and when his time's going to come. So when the boat's going, he knew that this wasn't his time. This wasn't it. He knew God was going to take care of him, right? That was the second part. Number one, he's tired. Number two, he knows who he is and what he is. It's ironic, right? You would think it'd be impossible to sleep. But he did, because he knew he was safe. And during this crisis, they panicked. I know you're not with us. But we've all been there, haven't we? Middle of a crisis. Seems like God's not answering our prayers. Does it seem responsive to our needs? But we have to trust that he knows what's best for us. He knows that we're not going to live forever. And that's why every day is precious. Precious to talk to others about the gospel. Precious to make sure our life is in order. To do the right thing. But the thing is, Jesus did wake up during that story. And what he did was amazing. If you ever heard my lesson, Who's This Jesus? This is probably one of the better scenes in that sermon. Is he goes and says, "Peace, be still." And he rebukes his disciples after that, right? He asks them two questions. And the question number one is, why are you so afraid? And the second one's just like it. Do you still have no faith? And that's interesting. You would think that Jesus would have compassion. Why are you so afraid? And you can almost realize the disciples were going to say, well, I don't know. Maybe there was a storm sloshing back and forth and things were going to happen, but it didn't, did it? Bad things didn't happen. Jesus used his ability. Peace, be still. We have to trust in our Lord. Jesus was hoping they would provide a stronger faith in the future. This was a test. This right now, this coronavirus, is a test for us too. Can we remain faithful in a time of fear and doubt? But Jesus is in your corner. He's with you. He's with me. He's with you. All of us. And he'll take care of us. Even if it's the next life. How many times have we ever said to ourselves, Lord, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And here we are. We're still here. But that's the third thing in this lesson. Is Jesus will calm that storm. No matter how great the storm is, no matter how powerful our trial is, that this storm will be taken care of. In Romans chapter 5 and verse 6, for when we were still without strength, in due time Christ died for the ungodly. He died for us. Even when we were enemies, God was still with us. Even when we're friends, God's still with us. And he's always watching out for us. He's always wanting what's best for us. In 1 Peter chapter 3 verse 12 says, for the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are open to their prayers. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. It seems like a contradiction, right? How can God be for the ungodly and then be against those who do evil? He died. He died so that we can become Christians. He doesn't want us to continue to live ungodly. There has to be a change. A change of life. And the fourth lesson is, it's only through these storms can we understand truly who Jesus is. I think the most amazing part of the story is the disciples' reaction to Jesus after he calmed the storm. If you're looking at Mark chapter 4, turn to verse 41. And it says, "And they feared exceedingly and said to one another, Who can this be, that even the winds and the sea obey him?" And that's something to think about, right? It's a very interesting thought. Who can this be? As if they didn't know. They were afraid of the storm. They were now terrified of Jesus. Because it says they feared exceedingly. They were with the great teacher. They were with God Almighty. And you have to think about, when you think about who Jesus is, your knees gives way. You begin to tremble. You find it difficult to breathe. Your insides shake. You can't stop. You know who this is. And yet, they knew who they were with. They were Jesus, the one and only, the most powerful, God in the flesh. And this is not the first time he said something like this. And you look at Mark chapter 1 verse 23, this kind of goes against what we're talking about, but again, it's another instance of him showing his ability. And in Mark chapter 1 verse 23, it says, "Now there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, saying, Let us alone. What have you to do with us, you Jesus of Nazareth? Did you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." People responded a similar way to the disciples, right? Mark chapter 1, verse 26. "And when the unclean spirit had convulsed him, he cried out in a loud voice that came out of him, and they were all amazed. So they questioned amongst themselves, saying, What is this? What new doctrine is this? For the authority he commands even unclean spirits, and they obey him." Well, throughout the Gospel of Mark, the disciples, as well as others, were coming to new understandings of who Jesus is when they saw these trials, when they saw these miracles. And that's always in context of crisis, of knowing truly who he is. And this is what Peter meant when he said in 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 6, "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while, if need be, you have been grieved by various trials, that the genuineness of your faith, being much more precious than gold that perishes, though it was tested by fire, may be found to praise, to honor, and glory at the revelation of Jesus Christ." When we get through this trial, when we get through this coronavirus, we'll come back together in services. And I can almost hear it now. It's going to be some of the best singing you've ever heard. It's going to be the best lesson you've ever heard. It's going to be the best prayer you've ever heard. You'll see smiles on faces. You'll see lines at restaurants. You'll get to see your favorite movies at the theater. Life will continue. We'll get through this together. We'll hug, and we'll shake hands, and we'll love. I want you to think about this. It must be terrible to be blind, to be deaf, to be lame. And Jesus healed every one of them to show who he is. When you look at doubting Thomas, everything seemed futile, depressing after they lost their Savior. Thomas experienced in a new way when he saw the resurrection and placed his finger in the hole in his hand, in Jesus' hand, in Jesus' side. He fell down and said, "My Lord, my God." We always think about doubting Thomas, but we often forget about faithful Thomas. when he realized who Jesus was. My Lord, my God. It's in us to have complete faith, to trust Jesus. And when we do, we have a greater understanding of him, a greater respect for his love when the storm's over. You may see the power of darkness, but the power of light is so much stronger. And Jesus is telling us not to live by fear, but by faith. And James chapter 1 and verse 2 says, "My brethren, count it all joys when you fall into various trials." You ever wondered why he said that? It's very clear, isn't it? When we rely upon God in all times to do this, to do that, to have faith, to be strong, we're building ourselves to be better, to be stronger, to be more. Think about your muscles. Let's say you've never ran a marathon, but you want to, right? What would you do? Would you run a marathon right now with no training whatsoever? No, that would be insane, right? You have to build up your muscles, strengthen them. You got to tear them apart, let them heal, tear them apart, make them stronger, go faster and longer. Our faith is like that too, isn't it? If we never test it, if we never build it up, try it out, use it, we're going to lose it, right? And that's what happens if we don't use our faith. We become faithless. But we can, and we can grow, so we do, and we get stronger, we get better, we become more. And think about it. We don't give up, do we? We know people who lie to us. We know people whose actions don't meet their words. We know all this stuff, but the one person we've always been able to count on who's never lied to us is Jesus and God. And we can take that to the bank. People will let us down, but God's always there. He's our one constant. We leave him a lot, but he wants us to come back home. But I want to recap some things. I want us to remember that we're going to have trials. We're going through one right now. We're going to have storms as long as we live. I once heard about a preacher who had a sign on his door. It says, if you have problems, come in and tell me about them. If you don't have any problems, tell me how you avoid them. Because no one can avoid them, no matter how hard we try. We're human. We make mistakes. Storms don't make an appointment. They come whenever they feel like. They're like the family member who knocks on the door uninvited. Makes things a little complicated. But we don't have to be that way. We don't have to be like, oh, here it comes. We pray. We strengthen each other. We keep on. And Jesus is with you. And he's remaining calm. When you pray for that promotion at work, you don't get that promotion. Maybe it's the Lord's way of saying, maybe this isn't for you. We don't know. But what we do know is he's there for us. And he's going to take care of us. And we may not know why. We may not always understand why. But he's there. And he cares. We all care. But don't let the storms overtake you. We're here to help. In this time, I've seen many different things. And we can focus on the negative if we choose to, which a lot of people do. Let me tell you something that I do see that you won't see in the media, that you won't see just about anywhere else. You know, we see people hoarding TP. We see people doing all this other kind of stuff. But what we do see and don't hear about is there's more people helping now than ever. If there's anything you can take from this storm, take this one positive. That during this coronavirus, we're seeing people rise up to help the elderly, to help the young, to help those in need. Yes, there are some people who are being awful people right now. But maybe their eyes will awaken to see what they're doing. There's a lot of good happening. And that's the thing. Times of struggle, times of badness, times of sadness. People has always risen to the occasion. Think of 9/11. We were all Americans then, weren't we? Think of right now, there's coronavirus. We're all Americans trying to get through this. Trying to help each other. Christians, this is to you. You may be out of services for a while, but don't let that keep you out of services after this storm passes. Don't let this break your spirit, but let this strengthen us. Let us help one another. Let us pray for one another. Let us guide one another. That's the purpose of what these videos are going to be over the next couple of weeks. Is to look at God's Word, to keep us strong, to keep us together. Those of you who have my phone number, you know, you can call me. Just, if I don't answer, leave a voice message. Text me, message me on Facebook, whatever you need to do if you need help. Well, I can't offer a baptism right now. What I can offer is my prayers for you. And I will be praying for you. Every one of us needs it right now. Some people may not believe in the power of prayers, but I do. I believe in it much. Thank you for spending your time with me. Like I said, if there's any questions or comments you have, please reach out to me. If there's anything you want to talk about, I don't have all the answers, but I can promise we'll study together until we find the answer. You take care of yourself during this time. When we see the light, we'll be singing louder than we ever have. We'll be praying better than we ever have. And that sermon, if it goes on for an extra 5 to 10 minutes, we'll be okay. I love you guys. We'll get through this together. Take care.